Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit about how you should put together your data when you're going to present it to your clients uh, in a graphical format or in a written format. And so what I have here is a report that I wrote for Southwest Airlines back in 2008 that was comparing some data that I had collected over the previous couple of years regarding media relations at Southwest Airlines. So this data is definitely dated. And I spoke with Southwest Airlines today, and they mentioned that they were okay with me sharing this. I just assume you didn't share it broadly. So this is actual data from a survey we conducted concerning their media relations audit. So with that context, let's talk about what we have here. Typically what I could do, and again, this is just one page out of the report. I'm going to provide you with the entire report here in the next module. But in this page, you can see how I would present data from one single question to the clients. And I like this format, and I advise you to follow this format. So what I do here is at the top of the page, I have uh, the question as it was included in the survey. So you see here that it simply says on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being not accessible at all and 10 being very accessible, how would you rate Southwest Airlines accessibility? And specifically that question, we were rating Southwest Airlines leaders, executives, how accessible are the leaders and executives. So I like to repeat in the actual report, I like to show the exact question, which you see right here. I like to show the exact response category. And then below that, I go ahead and provide them the data and the statistics. So typically I'll provide the mean and the mode. And then you see here I have the yearly means, because that's what people are going to care about. Mean and mode come and go whether people want them. I'll usually provide them on data where I can collect those. But what they're really going to want to see is the overall mean. And anything that I ever graph here in these charts, and I'm going to show you several charts, anything I ever graph on these charts, I'll always include a written statement above the graph that shows what the data is. So you'll see here, there's the 7.8, there's the 6.9, and there's the 6.3. I'm not a big fan of only showing the chart. I like to show the actual data right here, and I want you to do that same thing for the reports you write for me. I want you to show the data that you use to build the graph. This is important because sometimes this is if you just show only this portion here, they may not understand what the context is of these numbers, and this shows you the context of those numbers. So a couple things I want to mention about this graph in particular. One is I like using, this is simply done in Excel, and you'll see right here, I'm going to click back and forth between some Excel files, but you see here, this is the Excel file that I used to create this graph. There's ways that you can insert an image in the background of your Excel data. So look into that and make sure that you're aware of how to do that. And so I think it makes for a nice graph. The clients always appreciate it when I include some imagery in the document that shows that I'm keenly aware of what they do as a business. So I just went and grabbed a Southwest Airlines image off the internet, cleaned it up a little bit, and then put it in the background of all the graphs that I show them. So things that I think are important, and obviously you can fumble around in the graph section of Excel. It'll give you a standard graph when you ask it to create one, but there's also lots of things you can do behind the scenes to modify the graph. So here's some things I want you to always keep in mind. I like seeing what they call grid lines that go across. So these lines here go across the page to show some reference and some overall sizing of your data. Also gives you some context clues. So I like to click to include grid lines. I think that's important. I like to always include, it'll ask you, do you want to just show the graph, the bar itself, which here's the bar, or do you want to also include the number? And I like to include the number, and I always like to include it, when possible, a little bit above the graph. The software will let you put that number anywhere. Some people put it right here in the number, inside the bar. I don't like to see it that way. Again, this is a personal preference, but I like to see it just above the bar. So I'll always move it and put it right up here. Then I like to include the scale on the side, and this is the next thing we're going to talk about. Is the scale needs to always begin at the bottom of the scale, and I'll show you why here in just a second. But this is the overall layout I like: bolded headline, grid lines, scale on the left, numbers above the bars. And then the other thing I like to do is I like to take the colors of the company. Almost all companies in their logo will have a set of colors, and I'll try to use those as my colors in my bar graph. Again, you know Southwest Airlines logo It's red and blue with a little bit of us orangish yellowish in the logo as well. So I typically try to match those colors as close as I can and use them in my bar graphs. I think it's a nice touch. And then obviously at the bottom we'll put our labels here. So this is how I typically do a graph. You can see that I have this one here, and then I'll show you this other one here in a second. We'll talk about it shortly. But again, kind of the same format. But let's talk real quick about why you should scale your graphs at a 0 on the bottom. So here's the same graph, and you can see that what I've opened up is this format axis. And I'm going to close this real quick and show you that if you were to create this graph, all you have to do is come to the top of your page here. This is what I typed in to create this graph. You type this numbers in. This is 2004 respondents, 2006, 2008. I included my means. It's gathered from over here. You ask the data to graph it, and there it is. So once you get it graphed, then you can go and start messing with it a little bit. So what you do is you click inside the area. Now anything you click on, see, it'll allow you to start making modifications here. So do you want that line to be bigger? If you do, you can click on it to make this line right here going around the edge. You can make that bigger or smaller, heavier. And what you want to do is always make sure that all your graphs are consistent. So don't use in one graph a big heavy black line and then the next graph down on the next page to be a narrower, thinner black line. I try to make them as consistent as possible. You can change the colors here. So you click in here. It'll ask you, let's see, fill. And you can see where it'll ask you what color you want. You can pick your colors. So again, there's lots of things you can do with inside these graphs other than just let the computer make them. But one of the things that I'm really keenly interested in is scaling. So if you see here, I clicked over on the scale. And this is really important to me. What we did before is the minimum scale was 0, and that's the graph you see here on this page. Is done this way. So if you look here, and I hope you're following me along, this shows the data scaled from 0 to 10, and you can see that 7.8 is a little bit bigger than 6.9 and a little bit bigger than 6.3. You get a sense that there is some decrease in accessibility of airline leaders, but it's not much. It goes from 7.8, 6.9, 6.3. It is a decrease, but it's kind of a small decrease if you look at the overall size of these bars. Now, what some people do, and I cringe when I see this, is they'll want to blow their graphs up a little bit, and so they'll change this 0 to another number. So let's see if I change this number here to a 6. And let's say I change the maximum at the top to get rid of some of this white space. Let's say I change that to I'd have to change it to something a little bit above 7.8. So let's say I change that to an 8. All right. This is truly the same data as this right here. 7.8, 6.9, 6.3. But if you were to look at this without really knowing what you're looking at, someone would assume that because this bar right here is twice as big as this bar, that the decrease has been more than it has. Look how huge this 7.8 bar looks compared to this 6.3. It looks like there's been a huge decrease. In fact, it looks like this 6.3 is maybe a fourth as big as this 7.8. So it would seem that this bar here is 400% or 4 times bigger than this bar. In reality, it's this right here. They're just a slight decrease. And so when you move your scale off of 0 and this bottom number right here isn't your bottom of your scale, sometimes your bottom of your scale may be 1, whatever it is, you want this number right here to be the bottom of your scale, because when it's not, it distorts your graphs and it makes them imply something you don't mean to imply. So I would always change this number here to whatever the bottom of your scale is. Now the top of your scale, where it says here maximum, if you want that to be, let's say you don't want to have to show a lot of blank area at the top, you can move this number around without distorting the scale. You can move this to wherever you want. The bottom number always needs to be the lowest point on your scale. The maximum, again, it doesn't much matter because it doesn't distort your scale. If you make this, you can make it 20 for that matter. It still shows, see, a slight decrease. Now, the 20 makes no sense because the scale only went to 0 to 10. So I will typically use this scale over here as the same scale of the actual question, but it's not mandatory. But be aware of that. Now, obviously, within this too, if you wanted to do horizontal crossbars, you can see how all the things you can change. I can do that here. You can provide different numbers, major unit. You could put this at, these are your major units here. Let's say we made the major units at 0.5. You can see how now You have the distinctions here. I don't like it to get all cluttered up like that, so typically I'll use it as a 1. But the key thing about this I want you to be aware of is that there's lots of modifications you can make within these graphs. So create your graph, then double click within the components of the graph and make some adjustments to it. So all kinds of things you can do here if you want to, these numbers right here. So you can see that when I click on those, it asks me how big do I want them, what size do I want it. Let's see here, text box. Now my computer's going to crash on us. Let's see. It'll ask you where you want them, how big, all of this kind of stuff here. So including, I believe, you can just click on them and move them. So if I want to move that down there, I just don't like them within the bar like that. I think they're harder to see, and I think it gets obscure. So I just generally grab them and move them to right above the center of the bar. But again, some of this stuff is going to be up to you how you want to do it. Just select a style and stay with it. If you're going to put your numbers above the bar, then put them above the bar always. Don't put them above the bar in some cases and then below the bar in other cases. So that's how I like to graph data, but also how I like to present data on the page. So what you do there, just let me open this back up real quick, is you then typically can copy and paste this into a Word document, or if you're having trouble with that, you can save this one graph here as an image, and then save your images and then insert images over here into your actual Word document. You see what I've done here is I create one folder, it's called charts, that has every one of my charts for my entire report in this one document that I can save. That way if I ever have to go back and find them like I did today for this lecture. So there's the one we're using. Let's go look at the second chart real quick and then I'll wrap this up. So here's another example of a question, and you can see it's a little bit different. I'm comparing years within the same category here. So what I've done in the previous chart where we had the year at the bottom, 2004, 2006, 2008, here I've got the year listed up here, 2006, 2008, and down here at the bottom I have the actual answer categories of never, sometimes, usually, and always. And so there's lots of ways you can do this. The reason that there's not a 2004 is we didn't ask this question in 2004. That's why there's not another bar here. And you can see I follow the same type of format. I always start at 0. I only went up to 50% because it makes no sense to me to have this graph go to 100% when none of the data is over 50%. If you did it to 100%, then you can imagine all these little graphs, these little bars would be at the bottom of the page. So I like to kind of fill up the page, and that's why I reduce the top scale to 50%. But you can see the same thing here. What percentage of time do you use news items based on the following topics? I provided the answers to the questions here. So this is the answers in 2008. Here's the answers in 2006. And what I had done is I had myself coded, this question actually asked the people, what percentage of time do you use these items? And people wrote in 1% or 3% or 8% or whatever. I recoded those back into categories myself. So I included here this note that says, it implies, here's how I coded this. Anybody that said between 0 and 10%, I called them never. Anybody that coded between 11 and 50%, I called them sometimes. And that provides me a chance to get back onto a table here. So again, this is the format I want you to follow. I think this works pretty well. And this would be a page within the document as you go forward. So the document itself, and I'll share this document with you. In fact, here it is right here, is, let's see how many pages it is. It's 68 pages. And you can see how I've put this together. And so here's a section that I call responses to individual questions. And you'll see that I have all the data mapped out for every single question. This question was only asked only 1 year. So here's the question in the survey, like we mentioned earlier. Here's the mean and the mode, and then here's the data as it has been graphed. And so I'll just show you a couple examples here of how this works. And you can see that there's pages and pages. And what I typically do is this is open-ended data here, and you can see that these are people's responses in the open-ended format. But what I typically do is I typically do a page, and you can see that my page breaks are off a little bit now. But you can see I typically have a page for each question. So as you're talking to your client and doing your presentation, you can say, okay, turn to page 7 now. We'll look at question 4A. I'll never put more than one question per page, and this is just the pages of the document. So that's how I like to see you do this. I think this works out to be a pretty good format. I'm going to show you some other lectures as we go forward on how this goes together. But the main thing is always set your bottom of your scale to 0 if it's scale data, and more than anything else, just be aware of the fact that there are options within Excel when you graph your data to go in and double click and move some things around, change colors. That's why I never ever use the graphing feature in SPSS. SPSS graphing features are very limited. They're really meant to just show the researcher a graphical representation of the data. They're never really meant to be presentational graphs. So I'll always graph my stuff out in Excel. I will look at it in SPSS to see what I have, but I think those are ugly graphs. I don't appreciate the color schemes in them. I don't like the layout. So always make your graphs back in Excel or some other graphing format. Excel does fine with it, and it's pretty powerful software in terms of graphing. Just realize that whatever graph, Excel will spit out a graph for you every time. When you say graph this, it'll give you a very simple graph. Don't accept the simple graph. Go in and start clicking and make yourself a template. That's what I do. I decide what I want it to look like. I make a template, and I use that template through all my graphs. Okay, thanks.